In this brief presentation, I'm going to show how to multiply decimal numbers together. So as the first example, let's look at multiplying 7/100ths times 2/1000ths. The first step when multiplying decimal numbers together is to write them in decimal fraction form. So 7/100ths again is 7 over 100. 2/1000ths is 2 over 1000. Now that they're in fraction form, as we learned when we looked at fractions, multiplying is just a matter of multiplying the numerators together. I get 14 over 100,000. And then we can simply rewrite that decimal fraction in decimal form. So when I do so, I would now have 14 hundred-thousandths. And the reason I knew that it was going to be 5 decimal places is if you look at the denominator, it has 5 zeros in 100,000. So I'm going to need to have 5 decimal places in my final answer. Let's take a look at another example, a little bit more complex than the one we just did. So let's add another screen here, new page, and let's do this example. 75 and 14/100ths times 2 and 5/10ths. Now before we multiply these together, it's a great idea to do a quick estimate. So this is approximately 80 times 3, or 240. Now again, it's a rough estimate. We don't imagine that our answer is going to be exactly that, but it at least gives us an idea of what we're shooting for when we do this multiplication. So let's go ahead and take the two numbers now and rewrite them in decimal fraction form. So this is 7,514 hundredths, and 2 and 5/10ths becomes 25 tenths. And that means that my denominator is going to be 100 times 10, which is 1,000. Now the numerator is a different matter. We have to multiply those whole numbers together, and I'm going to use the method we learned with whole numbers, which is the area model. So I have 7,514, and I'm going to multiply that by 25. And I need to draw my grid, so I do so. And I'm going to go ahead and section it up. 7 times 2 is 14, then I add the 4 zeros that come from the 7,000 and the 20. 2 times 5 is 10. I add the 3 zeros that come from the 20 and the 500. 20 times 10 is 200. 4 times 20 is 80. 5 times 7,000 is 35,000. 5 times 500 is 2,500. 5 times 10 is 50. 4 times 5 is 20. And then I add the columns of the cells together. And when I do so, I get 175,000 for the first column. I get 12,500 for the second column. I get 250 for the third column. And I get 100 for the last column. And then to finish it off, I add those numbers together. So let me rewrite those. And when we do so, we get zeros in the far right, 5 in the next column, 8, and then 7, 8, and 1. So we have 187,850. So that's the numerator that I would have here for this decimal fraction. And now I can go ahead and rewrite that as a decimal number. That is 187 and 850 thousandths. One thing I should point out is I could have written this as or 187 and 85 hundredths. We don't need the 0 at the end. That's not required. And that concludes the brief presentation on how to multiply decimal numbers together.